The invitation had arrived weeks ago, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope embossed with a fancy address. It was from Marcus, one of Thomas's old classmates from medical school. A dinner party, he called it, a chance for a few of them to catch up, reminisce about the old days, and see how everyone was doing. Thomas had felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach when he saw it. He hadn't kept in close touch with most of his classmates. Their paths had diverged quite dramatically. While many of them had gone on to prestigious specialties, built lucrative private practices, and become pillars of the medical community in bustling cities, Thomas had chosen a different route. After residency, he'd felt a pull towards something quieter, more grounded. He'd become a general practitioner in the small rural town where his wife, Sarah, had grown up. He loved the rhythm of life there, the connection he felt to his patients, the sense that he was truly needed, truly making a difference in their lives, even if it wasn't glamorous or financially dazzling. He treated coughs and colds, delivered babies, stitched up cuts, and held the hands of the elderly in their final days. It was humble work, some might say, compared to the cutting-edge surgeries or groundbreaking research his former peers pursued. But it was his work, and it filled his heart in a way he suspected a larger paycheck or a fancy title never could. Sarah had encouraged his choice. She understood the quiet satisfaction of service. Her own work, in its own way, was about helping others, though on a scale Thomas sometimes found overwhelming. She ran a nonprofit organization that provided emergency medical aid and supplies to regions affected by natural disasters or conflict zones around the world. Her job was demanding, requiring frequent, often sudden, travel to places far removed from the comfortable life many of their peers enjoyed. It was work that commanded respect, yes, but it wasn't the kind of work that garnered glossy magazine profiles or invitations to society galas. It was often gritty, heartbreaking, and done far from the public eye. He'd almost declined Marcus's invitation. Social gatherings with his medical school cohort tended to highlight the differences in their chosen paths, often leaving Thomas feeling subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, judged. But Sarah had gently persuaded him. "It's good to connect with people from your past, Thomas," she'd said, her hand warm on his arm. "They were part of forming who you are. And who knows, maybe it won't be so bad. Besides," she'd added with a knowing smile, "I might even be able to make it, if my trip finishes on time, though I'll likely be late." Her trip had indeed run late. She was in a remote area dealing with the aftermath of a flood, and hadn't been able to confirm her arrival time until the last minute. Thomas had driven to the city alone, the familiar mix of apprehension and a quiet resolve settling over him. He knew who he was, and he was proud of the life he and Sarah had built, even if it didn't fit the conventional mold of success. Marcus lived in a sprawling house in an upscale neighborhood, a testament to a successful career. The house hummed with quiet elegance, polished hardwood floors, tasteful artwork, the soft murmur of conversation and clinking glasses. Thomas felt a little out of place in his simple suit, comfortable but certainly not designer. He was greeted warmly by Marcus and his wife, who quickly steered him towards the living room where the others were gathered. There were about 10 of them, a familiar constellation of faces etched with the passage of 20 years. There was David, the renowned cardiovascular surgeon, looking every bit the part with his silver hair and confident smile. There was Eleanor, who had built a chain of successful cosmetic surgery clinics, her appearance meticulously enhanced. And there, perched elegantly on a velvet armchair, was Rebecca. Rebecca. She had been one of the sharpest minds in their class, ambitious and fiercely competitive. She now headed a prominent research division at a major pharmaceutical company, a position of significant influence and wealth. Her smile, as Thomas approached, was polite, but held a familiar glint of assessment in her green eyes. The initial conversations were easy enough. Polite inquiries about health, comments on how little everyone had changed, a polite lie, Thomas noted privately, and shared laughter over old, harmless anecdotes from medical school. But inevitably, the talk turned to careers. "So, David, heard you just published another paper?" "Groundbreaking work, as always," Marcus said, raising a glass. David demurred modestly, but the pride in his voice was evident as he spoke about his latest research. Then Eleanor chimed in, sharing a story about opening her fifth clinic. The conversation flowed, a steady stream of achievements, accolades, and the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, flexing of professional muscles. Then the focus shifted to Thomas. And Thomas, Rebecca said, her voice cutting through the pleasantries, still holding down the fort in, where was it again? That little town. Thomas felt the familiar prickle of defensiveness, but he met her gaze calmly. Yes, Stillwater. It's a good town. My practice is busy. Busy, I'm sure, Rebecca said, taking a slow sip of her wine. Though I imagine the challenges are rather different than, say, managing a research budget in the millions or performing complex procedures. She didn't make it sound like a question. It was a statement, wrapped in polite condescension. Another classmate, Richard, who had become a successful hospital administrator, added, Yes, Thomas, I always admired your idealism in school. But surely after all these years, haven't you ever thought about scaling up, making a bigger impact, or simply enjoying the rewards of all that hard work? Thomas smiled gently. I think I am making an impact. It's just on a different scale. One patient, one family at a time. And the rewards, he paused, looking around the room, the expensive furniture, the designer clothes, are different too. They're measured in trust, in seeing people get better, in being there for them when they need it most. Rebecca let out a small dry laugh. Ah, the noble calling. Very admirable, Thomas. Though I confess I prefer rewards I can deposit in a bank account. One does have to think about the future after all, providing for one's family. The implication was clear. His choices, while perhaps noble, were impractical, perhaps even irresponsible, lacking in the financial security that defined success in their world. The others shifted slightly, some looking sympathetic, others avoiding his gaze. Speaking of family, Eleanor interjected, perhaps sensing the awkwardness. Thomas, are you married? You haven't mentioned anyone. Yes, I am, Thomas said, his voice softening noticeably. To Sarah. We've been married for 10 years now. Sarah, Rebecca repeated as if tasting the name. And what does Sarah do? Is she involved in your practice? A nurse, perhaps? Her tone suggested that anything less would be beneath consideration. Thomas felt a warmth spread through him, unrelated to the subtle chill Rebecca tried to cast. He thought of Sarah, her tireless energy, her unwavering commitment to her work. She runs a nonprofit, he said simply. A nonprofit, Rebecca echoed, her eyebrows lifting slightly. Local? Something supporting the town, perhaps? It's international, Thomas said. Emergency aid, medical supplies, disaster relief. Rebecca's smile became a little tighter. Ah, international. Sounds challenging, and I imagine not terribly lucrative. Must be difficult, managing financially on a doctor's salary in a small town and a nonprofit income. Unless, she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, Sarah has independent means? The question hung in the air, blunt and bordering on rude. She seemed determined to find a crack in his life structure, to prove that his unconventional path was somehow lacking. Before Thomas could formulate a polite yet firm response, there was a stir near the entrance. The doorbell had rung earlier, and someone had gone to answer it. Now a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted for a moment before stepping into the light of the room. It was Sarah. She was not wearing a formal gown or dripping in jewels. Her clothes were simple, practical, but impeccably clean. Dark trousers, a soft gray cashmere sweater, a lightweight jacket slung over one arm. Her face was lovely, intelligent, and tired in a way that spoke of long hours and difficult work. Her light brown hair was pulled back simply, and she wore minimal makeup. But as she stepped fully into the room, a quiet authority seemed to emanate from her. Thomas's face lit up. Sarah, you made it! He rose from his chair, moving towards her, his earlier discomfort melting away at the sight of her. Sarah's tired face broke into a radiant smile. Thomas, my love, I'm so sorry I'm late. The flight was delayed. She reached him and they embraced, a simple, heartfelt gesture that spoke volumes of their deep connection. As they pulled apart, Marcus came forward, smiling. Sarah, it's so good to finally meet you. Thomas has told us so much. It's lovely to be here, Marcus, Sarah said, her voice clear and warm. My apologies for the delay. We just wrapped things up in the Philippines, coordinating aid deliveries, and I flew straight back. Philippines? Aid deliveries? The casual mention hung in the air, a faint ripple passing through the room. Rebecca's expression, moments before smug, was now one of polite curiosity. Sarah turned to the group, her smile inclusive. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. Thomas began to introduce her. Everyone, this is my wife, Sarah. Sarah, this is Marcus, our host, and David, Eleanor, Richard, and Rebecca. He gestured to each person. As Thomas said Sarah's name and gestured towards Rebecca, Rebecca's eyes widened. She seemed to stiffen, a look of disbelief replacing her earlier condescension. She wasn't just looking at Sarah. She was seeing her properly for the first time. Sarah, Rebecca whispered, her voice thin. Not Sarah Jenkins? Sarah turned to Rebecca, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Yes, she replied, a gentle smile touching her lips. Sarah Jenkins. And you're Rebecca, aren't you? We met once, briefly, years ago, at that UN Summit on Global Health Initiatives. You were presenting your research. The room fell silent. Sarah Jenkins. The Sarah Jenkins. The woman who, in her quiet, relentless pursuit of humanitarian aid, had become a figure of immense respect and influence on the international stage. The founder and driving force behind Global Compassion Corps, an organization that had, in recent years, become synonymous with effective, large-scale disaster relief and medical support for vulnerable populations worldwide. She wasn't famous in the way a movie star was famous, but within circles that understood real-world impact, her name carried significant weight. Marcus's house, David's publications, Eleanor's clinics, Richard's administrative roles, Rebecca's research budget, they all seemed suddenly small, somehow less significant in the face of the quiet, tireless work Sarah did, saving lives and bringing hope on a massive scale. Rebecca looked utterly stunned. Her carefully composed facade crumbled. She had been so focused on judging Thomas by the narrow metrics of their world, money, prestige, conventional career progression, that she had completely failed to recognize the quiet power and profound importance of his wife's life, a life implicitly linked to and supported by his own. Yes, Rebecca managed, her voice barely a whisper. The summit. I didn't realize. Sarah smiled kindly. It was a busy event. So, Thomas? She turned back to her husband, her hand finding his. Tell me all about the evening. How was the catching up? The conversation that followed was different. The air of competitive display had dissipated, replaced by a quiet awe and perhaps a little embarrassment among some of the peers. When Sarah spoke, she didn't boast or seek accolades. She spoke of the challenges of getting supplies into difficult regions, the resilience of the people she met, the vital work done by volunteers and local medical staff, often people like Thomas, working on the ground in underserved areas. She spoke with passion and humility, and gradually the peers began to ask genuine questions about her work, the conversation shifting from personal achievement to global need. Thomas watched his wife, his heart swelling with love and pride. He saw the effect she had, not by demanding attention, but by simply being herself, by radiating the quiet strength of someone dedicated to a purpose far larger than themselves. And in that moment, the subtle judgments cast upon his own life felt utterly meaningless. His work in Stillwater, supporting Sarah in her demanding calling, the values they shared, they were not less than. They were, in their own way, a different kind of richness, a different kind of success. The evening ended late, the goodbyes warmer than the initial greetings. Rebecca approached Thomas and Sarah as they were leaving. Thomas, she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Sarah, it was an eye-opener. Sarah, your work is truly remarkable. She looked at Thomas, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. And Thomas, it seems I had a very narrow view of things. I apologize. There's nothing to apologize for, Rebecca, Thomas said gently. We all find our own path. Sarah smiled. It was lovely meeting you all. Perhaps if you are ever passing through Stillwater, you could visit Thomas's practice. See the different challenges firsthand, she added with a playful glint in her eye that wasn't unkind. In the car driving back home, the city lights fading behind them, Thomas reached for Sarah's hand. You were wonderful, Sarah, he said softly. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. They seemed surprised. A little, Thomas chuckled. They measure success differently sometimes. In numbers, in headlines, in square footage. And we measure it in lives touched, Sarah finished for him, squeezing his hand. In knowing we're where we need to be. Doing what we're meant to do. Thomas drove on, the quiet hum of the engine a peaceful contrast to the evening's revelations. He had gone to a dinner party expecting to feel like the less successful one, the one who hadn't lived up to their shared potential for conventional greatness. Instead, he left feeling like the richest man in the world, married to a woman whose quiet impact dwarfed any of the achievements celebrated that night, validated not by his peers' recognition, but by the shared purpose and deep love that defined his life with Sarah. The true treasures, he knew, were never the ones that glittered the most brightly on the surface. They were the ones held close, quietly woven into the fabric of a life well lived, hand in hand with the one you loved.